You are watching Caught for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
This is your quick before you buy it for Star Wars The Clone Wars, a pandemic system game.
If you like, we have a couple of playthroughs on the channel if you want to see what a full gameplay looks like, as well as a long, in-depth, exhaustive review of this game as well.
Which, as Greg points out, is nice to watch after you play the game.
So let's go down to the table and just see how it plays.
Star Wars The Clone Wars is a spin-off of the classic cooperative board game Pandemic, with players performing pick-up and deliver style goals while fighting against one of 4 different boss villains. It was published in 2022 and designed by Alexander Ortloff, based on Pandemic by Matt Leacock. It's a medium to low weight complexity game featuring cooperative card management and pick-up and deliver mechanics. It has a 1 to 5 player count, and playing time is 60 to 90 minutes. Setup begins with players choosing which villain from a set of 4 to fight against, and then setting out that villain's sheet and deck of cards. As in standard Pandemic, the board is then seeded from an initial set of invasion cards, placing enemies on the locations shown. The villain's figurine will be placed on the last card drawn. Players then choose roles, each of which has a unique power. Lastly, a number of mission goal cards are randomly selected based on the difficulty level, all but 2 of which will remain face down at any given time. Play proceeds in clockwise turns. On each turn, a player completes 4 actions and then performs an invasion and villain step. Actions available to a player include moving to an adjacent space, drawing cards, fighting enemies, and attempting mission goals. Unlike standard Pandemic, players do not automatically draw cards at the end of their turn. Fighting enemies on the player's current location is done by rolling the die and exhausting cards to improve the results. All players on the same space may contribute cards from their hands. Some die results will cause the player to take damage, which involves discarding cards if the damage cannot be blocked by exhausting shield cards. Attempting mission goals works in a nearly identical manner, except that each mission card states where it must be performed, which card types can be used to achieve it, and how much damage is sustained when it is accomplished. Many mission cards also include special rules that include restrictions, requirements, effects, etc. After a player completes their turn, a number of invasion cards are revealed which bring out new enemies onto the board, as in standard Pandemic. If too many enemies accumulate in a space, it may trigger an increase of the threat track and the placement of a blockade token, which is harder to defeat. Then the top card from the villain-specific deck is revealed, indicating what actions the villain takes, which vary depending on which villain was chosen to play against. One of the cards in each villain's deck will increase the invasion track, increasing the number of enemies brought onto the board each turn. When players accomplish all mission goal cards, the villain sheet is flipped over to reveal a final villain task that must be performed to defeat the villain and win the game. Several situations will trigger an advance of the threat level, and players lose if it ever reaches its maximum. Lastly, while the rulebook mentions a solo variant, it is essentially simply playing the game by controlling 2 separate player hands and alternating between them.
The components for this game are fantastic. The figures and everything, super paintable. They look really great. There's no like bent lightsabers or anything. And they've really done a nice job of making the game easy to understand and have a very nice ease of play. The board and stuff looks great. It's really worth the price point and nice production. Thematically, we aren't really familiar with the Clone Wars. We know a lot about Star Wars, but not that particular era. But even despite that, you can see that there's a lot of love and story going into playing the missions and things like that, and there's a lot of cool little story elements. So I think knowing a lot about the Clone Wars, I think you're going to get quite a lot out of these scenarios and things, even though they are a bit abstracted.
You might be excused for expecting a sort of kiddie version of Pandemic, but actually we're looking at one of the most fascinating iterations of the Pandemic system. And if you are a fan of Pandemic, there's a lot in here that's different and that's interesting and compelling and challenging. There are several key mechanical differences here. Instead of having to cure a disease, here you've got mission cards that are quite varied, that are used to adjust the difficulty. Another key difference is that you've got 4 villains that you can play against, all of which change the way you play the game quite substantially and change the pace of the game to give you this exciting finale. And then the last thing that's changed rather dramatically is your hand of cards and how they're used. Here you're doing a little bit of almost deck building where you're building up your engine and using those cards by exhausting them rather than discarding them. Lots of changes to the pandemic system, and almost all of them are successful and fun.
The game has quite a bit of replayability. You first have a very large deck full of these mission cards, which have pretty cool little story elements that are thematic and also provide different challenges. Each of the villains in the box, there are 4 of them, and they are different sort of scenarios that you can play through, which change the game considerably. Each villain has their own deck of cards, which allows them to behave differently and taxes some different aspect of the game, making you change your strategy to meet that challenge. Additionally, when you complete all of the missions, the villain will flip over and you will get an exciting climactic battle, which is the finale. Each of those has a different set of parameters that you have to defeat, and it's pretty exciting.
As a pandemic super fan, I really did not expect much, but this is one of my favorite pandemic evolutions. And for me, it's all of the things I love in Pandemic. I love the spatial navigation stress of, do I have enough time to get over here? When should we switch our plan from defending and sort of mitigating problems to rushing to the end and trying to solve the goal? Everything feels like almost like an alternate reality pandemic. Like everything's different, but all of the enjoyment of pandemic, of feeling that stress of things getting out of control and running out of time is all here. And yet some of your strategies that you normally play pandemic don't work, and you have to change them up. And everything that was added to this game adds more interesting strategic decisions. When to attack the villain, when to sort of get him off the board, how to prepare for the finale. And even the things that you sort of would fear the most might be going in the wrong direction, like these dice, this die rolling that they've been adding to the last couple iterations, is so controlled, so well balanced. It just adds a little bit of push your luck to it. For me, a huge win, highly recommended.
I'm also a Pandemic super fan, and I love to see all the different iterations of this system. And this takes it even a step further by having iterations within this iteration with all the different villains and things. I think it's a wonderfully thematic journey, especially for a Pandemic game. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about this specific area of Star Wars to enjoy those little nods and things, but even still, I found it quite enjoyable. This game definitely has the things that I really love in a board game, where you can say, hey, I think we should do this, this, and this, and this. And then your teammate can say, well, that's a good idea, but what if we did this and this and this? And then maybe you take a little bit from both of you and do that third plan. There's a lot of interesting decision making, and it's almost like that tyranny of small decisions.
We should say it's longer than regular Pandemic. Pandemic game might take you 45 minutes to an hour. This is probably going to take you closer to an hour and a half, but it's fairly simple, comparable complexity. A new player could jump in and enjoy this as well as the experts.
Yeah, I feel like maybe a lot of people, like we almost did, would pass this one by because, maybe not into Star Wars, or they think it's maybe some offshoot of Pandemic that they don't really necessarily want to try. But I think for gamers, or maybe for casual people, I think doesn't matter. I think whether you're a huge Star Wars fan or a big Pandemic fan, I think this game is really fantastic. It's a very good system.
One caveat: if you are experienced at Pandemic, do yourself a favor, play on the high level of difficulty. Do not play these games normal. It'll be too easy. As a default, this game is set to too easy, and you won't have fun.
So a clear recommendation from us. We hope this helped you decide whether this game is for you or not, and we will see you on the next episode.
Wait.
Yeah,
They're going to see the rules video now.
I know, but I want to mention just that the art.
We should have ended that intro with "Let's look at the rules." I am going to take over at the very end. The part
I like
about
it that like the thing I thought
I'm giving
of-
you credit. I gave you credit.
You did that. Is
I
true.
always give you credit. But then
Okay.
how are you going to sign off?
This is it. Ready?
Do I get to say anything?
Ready?
Do you
just-
hand off to me?
Nope.
Okay.
So there you have it. I said that way too loud.
Yes, you did.
I was trying to ensure my dominance. So
Do you need me to bring this home?
no, I'm asking because we're doing back and forth.
Do it, are we?
Yeah, you just went, and now it's my turn to say like,
Did I?
yes, you have absolutely finished.